What's the most disturbing family secret you learned of when you got older? My grandma's sister died when she was 15, hit by a car right in front of the family house. Well, my uncle bought the house years ago and found her hidden journal. Turns out great-grandpa was abusing her, and she killed herself. My father's father molested both of his female children, and it only came out when he tried to molest his first female grandchild. Turns out the apple didn't fall far from the tree either, as I found out a few months ago one of my father's brothers tried to molest my older sister. A lot lighter than 99% of this thread, but I didn't find out until like 15 years after the fact that when my uncle divorced his wife and got with another woman was because they were swingers and the husbands decided to just swap wives. Now they're hardcore Bible thumpers? Edit. Yes, the swap was consensual by all parties. My uncle impregnated his 12-year-old stepdaughter. He is serving a life sentence. He just had a heart attack but survived. He's been in prison since the early 2000s. My sister and I recently found the court records deep diving on Google, and the details from the victim's testimony were nausea-inducing. The fact that he even went to trial and dragged her through, that is so abhorrent to me. How was he going to possibly argue what he did with physical evidence growing inside of her? Oh, and her mother was super religious and forced her to give birth to that baby. My sister's boyfriend was arrested and charged with first-degree rape of his elementary school-age daughter. He raped her repeatedly under threat of her life. My sister gave a stand-by-your-man speech, bonded him out of jail, and harbored him in her house until the family intervened, forced the termination of her lease, and removed her furniture, evicting them both. They broke up and I don't speak to either one of them, so I don't know what happened at his trial if it has even happened yet. The girl lives with her bio mom, not my sister, but I will never know the outcome of the situation. They are all in a different state, and there is no point of contact now. All I know is my sister moved jobs and is living on her own with no husband or children. We don't speak. My paternal grandfather was a preacher and generally thought to be a godly man. He was also a pedophile who molested all his daughters and granddaughters except for me and my baby sister. The reason we weren't touched was because my dad put a knife to the old man's throat and explained in great detail what would happen if he touched us. I had no idea about the old man until my aunt told me when I was in my late 40s. My dad had scars across his back from being beaten with a leather strap. Daddy was such a gentleman with us kids, never spanked us, and so rarely raised his voice that it was significant when he did. Now I understand why he broke the cycle with us. There were so many layers of all kinds of abuse in that house. The most horrifying part of the situation was the old man was highly thought of. From the outside looking in, we appeared to be a good family. My older sister, who's about 5 years older than me, had been looking after me and our siblings because my bio mom would be gone out doing drugs for days on end. One day she told me with tears in her eyes that she still has guilt for trying to drown me as a baby when bathing me once because she had seen my bio mom try to do it. Somehow this comment feels more like a punch to the gut. Even considering all the other layers of abuse I've experienced at the hands of both my bio parents. My mom was a sex worker and she has always blamed me for ruining her body because I was a C-section. Born months early, with cerebral palsy, was less than 2 pounds, and my heart stopped twice in the NICU, all because she wanted to do meth and couldn't care less about her 5 children. She ended up supplying my younger brother with drugs basically his whole life, and he intentionally overdosed in her home almost 3 years ago. She found him and said that she was too nervous to narcan him. After all the physical, emotional, and essay that happened across my life, I will never forgive her for that, ever. She tried to hug me at his viewing. I don't say this lightly. I'm waiting for the day she passes, honestly. She had a really fucked up life, and I can connect the dots as to why she is the person she is. And I don't believe she deserved the upbringing she had, but I would never treat a human the way she has the people in her life. I've grieved about not having parents my whole life, but I feel I'll find more peace then, I dunno. My mom always told me my father had died in Vietnam during the war. Imagine my surprise when he showed up to my high school graduation because he'd seen my name in the local paper. I graduated valedictorian and I'm a junior. Turns out my mom had kidnapped me when I was a baby to keep my father from trying to get custody when they split up. He lived about an hour away from me the whole time I was growing up and neither of us knew it. Grandma had a younger sister who she was told had died in infancy, but was actually sent away to other family members because she was severely mentally disabled. The family was embarrassed to have an abnormal child around. We found her living with some of Grandma's cousins where she was regularly beaten up and even doused with boiling water when she misbehaved. She was in her mid-50s then, but had the mental capacity of an 8-year-old. She eventually got out and ended up in a special needs nursing home where she was fortunately treated better, but the damage was apparent, and she'd scream and throw a fit whenever the caregivers filled up a hot bath, or made coffee, or had anything to do with hot water. The one vacation I went on with my dad, which I cherished as one of the few father-son bonding experiences of my childhood, was actually my mom telling him, "Take your son and GTFO for a few weeks while you decide if you want to be married or not." Apparently, there was a work-wife situation brewing, and my mom was not having it. My mom, 18 at the time, was raped by her uncle at his 40th birthday party. Afterwards, a family meeting was called where everyone expressed their opinion, but the kicker is my mom's experience got dismissed. Her grandmother labeled it as her fault because she was drunk, and it was decided to keep it secret from his young sons at the time, especially the oldest who had additional needs. This year, her grandmother passed away, and at a small gathering with alcohol before the funeral, her auntie, the rapist's younger sister, had revealed to everyone that he had also done it to her when she was 18 back in the 70s. Naturally, this was a major shock to my mom and brought up my feelings for her and the extended family. My auntie, who married the rapist, was still determined to keep it a secret from her oldest son, who is now in his 40s, even though he is now a functioning adult. Thankfully, though, after this revelation, this disgusting excuse of a human being has been cut off by most family, and my mom has now started a new chapter of healing. All I knew in the 90s is that my much older first cousin killed a child. The news broke while my siblings and I were watching our after-school shows. My mom tried to protect me from it. As I got older, I learned the truth, and it was ugly. As my mom learned the evidence during the trial, she became certain without a doubt that he was guilty. Her elder sister maintained his innocence. My mom went up to the victim's mother and she said, "I'm sorry for your loss." My aunt lost it on her. My aunt died not long after. My mother has since passed, and I watched a show about the case, and they interviewed the mother, who is still alive. In it, she mentioned my mother coming to give her condolences, and she said it must have taken a great deal of courage. My mother had died by the time it aired, and I cried for a long time. One of my mom's sisters died of SIDS in the 50s. Years later, it came out that my grandfather got tired of hearing her cry and frustratingly shook the shit out of her. She actually died of shaken baby syndrome. I don't know how authorities didn't know. My great-aunt was a nurse at a mental hospital and fell in love with a guy being evaluated to stand trial for murder. She helped him escape, and they ran off to Florida. But the police tracked them down and her lover was sentenced to the electric chair. She got off easy, though. Before all of that craziness, her younger sister had come to live with her, and then killed herself. My aunt worked in a distant city and promised her father that she would get her sister a job at the hospital and look after her. But the sister got pregnant by a married man who dumped her, so she jumped off a bridge. I found all this out like 80 years after it happened while doing family research. My 90-year-old mom reluctantly confirmed it. I discovered that my siblings and I grew up in foster care because no family members were willing to help my aunt and uncle get custody of us. We were in Missouri while they lived in Michigan. They fought the courts with what means they had but couldn't afford the legal battle. The system thought our mentally ill mother was the best choice, even though we would only be home with her for a few months before going back into the system. Rinse repeat until my sister and I at 15 and 16 were homeless. Luckily, we had an older brother that was adopted by a great family and found us. sent some bus tickets to Detroit to come stay with him, and showed us fucked up kids what unconditional love was. I knew that my biological father had a sister that died when she was 6 years old. It wasn't until I was grown that I heard the full story. My dad was 10 and she was 6. He was supposed to be looking out for her while they were outside playing. They had walked to a neighbor's house, and she wanted to go home. Dad wanted to stay and told her to walk back home by herself. She was hit by a car and died. My grandparents blamed my dad, and he carried that guilt his entire life. My great-grandfather was found hanging from a tree in the backyard of his house when he was in his 60s. It was declared a suicide. When my grandmother passed away, we found her diary, and apparently her brothers had lynched him. He was white passing and had lived his life as a white man without any contact with his family. Apparently, one of my great-grandfather's brothers passed away, leaving his estate to my great-grandfather. When the lawyers showed up to tell my great-grandfather about his inheritance, somehow his race got brought up. His sons were in the Mississippi chapter of the KKK and lynched their father for lying about his race and marrying their mother. I never knew any of my great-uncles on my grandmother's side. But it definitely explained why she was so hesitant to ever talk about her family. That's all for now. Thanks for listening to Digital Apathy.